Thanks, Matt. Woo. Woo. Okay. Okay. Topic today, as Matt was saying, is to transform supporters, and I'm going to use this word broadly today. You know, what Quan and I do is a lot about volunteer management, but it's activation, transformation, engagement broadly, with the hopes of having people get out of that narrow category of just being thought of as a volunteer. So how do we turn volunteers into supporters more generally? This way. Okay, this is the official slide. I'm Johann Shudlick. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Golden. The unofficial slide, though, I think is even more important because I'm here not just as a technology leader for one of the partners of CauseMic. I'm here as someone who spent 13 years in New York City cooking meatloaf at a soup kitchen in the Lower East Side. So I've actually been in the shoes of a volunteer through most of my career professionally. In addition to that, I'm also a community organizer. Today, I'm executive director of the ATX-GFL. It's the Austin Gay Flag Football League. I'm on the board of Finance Requires Effective Education and the prior president of the LGBT Center in Manhattan. And the reason I'm giving you that context is because this isn't just about, Quan and I as technology leaders. It's about us as people who have been in seats similar to yours, in seats similar to your supporters, and understand kind of at a broad level what they need and how we can best engage them. So here's the quick agenda. We'll do some broad setting the stage. We're going to take you through 4 concrete strategies that we hope will be effective for you and your organizations. Tell you a smidge about Golden, because I can't get off the stage without doing a little bit of that, and then have some time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so setting the stage, have a couple questions. I'm not nearly fancy enough to have done the Slido thing, and so we're gonna do this old school style. So number 1, just kind of show of hands in the room. How many of you have an official volunteering effort within your organization? Like, do you have volunteers that you use in some capacity? Okay, great, so maybe 2/3 of the room, something like that's helpful. How many of you think about volunteer engagement through time? So not just who shows up for their shift, but do you have a concept of a journey or some sort of like longer term engagement strategy for your volunteers? Can I get a show of hands? A little bit, see a little bit of like, okay, great. And then last, how many of you have strategies or playbooks to convert volunteers into donors? A couple. Okay, great. And on this last one, I don't ask it to necessarily suggest you should. I actually think that can happen most effectively when it just occurs organically. It's not necessarily about forcing people across that line, but it's about building, and this is the topic of today's discussion, building super fans who want to organically contribute and take their engagement with your organizations to the next level. Okay, you all know this much better than I do, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But the reality is, individual giving is stagnant with downward pressure on retention and recurring giving. Obviously something that is in the front of the entire sector's minds today. It's not all bleak though. There's hope, right? And the hope comes from the fact that volunteerism is on the rise, particularly with younger generations who are feeling motivated and compelled to get involved and participate in the organizations and contribute back to the causes that they feel most passionate about. Why is that good news in light of the reality that we're operating in today? Well, number 1 is frequency. Volunteers are 2 times as likely to donate when solicited as people who don't volunteer. Second is amount. Volunteers give 3 times as much in individual donations as people who don't volunteer. And finally, it's engagement. Volunteerism is a great way to other kinds of generosity. Sure, it might be donating, could also be other things like advocacy. And so the point I want to leave you with today is even if you don't have a mature or robust volunteer program at your organization today, I think there's lots of reasons you might want to consider that in light of the reality we're facing on the fundraising front generally. Okay, so that's the broad backdrop. let's talk about how volunteerism and volunteering works at a lot of orgs. This isn't meant to be, accusatory or anything, but just the general observation we see from the thousands of organizations who use our software today. Number one, volunteering is principally based on convenience. What do I mean by that? A lot of the way people choose to volunteer is a function of two things. It's a function of location and scheduling availability. You have time on Saturday morning, what do you choose to do? Well, let me see what I could do Saturday morning. Oh, there's a shift at the soup kitchen, or I can go walk a dog, or I can go check on a neighbor. That's not particularly, it's not a great backdrop for a meaningful relationship to a forum, because it feels very transactional when you're limited based on purely on availability and location. Second observation, I mentioned this a little before, volunteering is often sometimes transactional or superficial. Come paint this room, thanks for painting the room, that's the end of it. One of the things I'm going to challenge everyone to do today is think a little bit more broadly about how do we get out of that transactional mindset of what can we get out of the volunteers, and instead, how can we consider this as kind of the first step in a process where we build a relationship with them. A lot of what we hear from different organizers today is that the volunteering function is functionally segregated from the rest of the org. Oh, that's the volunteer team, they're over there, they don't necessarily interact as much with the development teams or other parts of the program delivery team. Obviously problematic, there's lots of synergies, we'll talk about in a little bit about that. And finally, in a lot of orgs we talk to, tech is used for handoffs, meaning, someone volunteers, maybe you get that volunteer record pushed into Virtuous or HubSpot or whatever it is, and then it shows up in some drip campaign, and that's kind of the extent of the conversion between people who volunteer and converting them to donors or whatever else. So, these four things might sound a little bleak. Maybe not bleak, but not super exciting, no one's jazzed about these things. But the good news is, even with this being kind of the state of volunteerism today, volunteers are still donating 3 times as much, right? And so the thing I want everyone to see is there's so much upside that we have if we can get this right together and really think about how do we take the relationships that we have with volunteers and really level them up, really level up our investment in them as people who will not just come and paint a room or serve some food or do other really important work, but also create a bigger, more meaningful relationship between them and your org. Okay. Now we're going to get into some of the tools and techniques to level up your volunteers. I'm going to start with a somewhat nerdy, esoteric framing, but I'm a firm believer that relationships are foundational to meaning. What does that say? It's saying if you want someone to find meaning in the work that they're doing, understanding who you are and why you do it is going to be a cornerstone of that. Meaningful experiences that people have are going to create a connection to your org and your mission. That connection is the seed that gets planted for a relationship to blossom between that volunteer and your org. The last part of this premise I'll give you is that it's really important when you're engaging volunteers that it's not a one-way street, right? They might come to you needing various different things, right? Some people come because they, might need to perform some community service hours for the court ordered. Some people might, come to you because they care deeply about the cause that you represent. Some people might just want to get a connection back to, their local community. But understanding that and being able to recognize what brings people to you is one of the cornerstones of being able to give them back something in addition to the service that they're offering you. So that's the nerdy kind of premise stuff. Now let's get into the actual kind of tactical stuff. Oh wait, sorry, one more thing. I mentioned this a little before. All 3 of these take us to a place where it's going to require us to change our mindset about volunteers, right? Volunteering is not a transaction. It is often the initial one, a step on a journey of mutual discovery, of a volunteer figuring out how do they believe, how do they support, how do they engage with your organization, and if you're doing it well, we would suggest it's also a journey that you're on with them of how do I understand what drives, what motivates, and what compels this particular volunteer. Maybe not necessarily why they came in the first place, so that's obviously relevant, but where do they want to go on a longer term engagement, and what does that actually look like on that pathway to converting them to becoming superfans? Okay. Step 1, Strive to understand your volunteers' intentions. Intentions are a big deal because I'd suggest a lot of how people feel about experiences is less about the absolute and more about how does it match up against their expectations for the thing, right? And so, we were talking a little bit about meaning before. Meaning is something that's deeply personal, and a one-size-fits-all approach is going to leave people behind. And why that's important is it isn't saying you should customize your volunteer program to every single volunteer, but it's saying at a macro level, making sure the type of work that you're offering your volunteers, the ways that they can engage with your organization is going to pay dividends if you can understand at a high level the reason why people come to you and the things that they find meaningful about their work with you. How do you do that? Well, I'd suggest you not just come, and I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, again, volunteering being a function of two things, like when are you available and where can you show up? Instead, really starting to ask thoughtful questions with your volunteers, leaning on the whys and the hows, not just the whats and the whens. I'll give you some examples here. Why did you choose to volunteer with us? Which of your skills are you most proud of? How would you describe your most meaningful moments? When we can start to understand those types of things from volunteers, we'll be setting ourselves up to be able to deliver and kind of meet them where they're at in terms of expectations and hopefully deliver some more meaningful moments for them. Understanding individual intention is the best way to meet volunteers where they're at. I'm going to give you a little bit of a story. You saw at the beginning the meatloaf kitchen that I volunteered at in the Lower East Side. I was working on Wall Street at the time, and I fell in love with being a meatloaf chef. And the reason I fell in love with being a meatloaf chef was because during my job on Wall Street, I dealt with a lot of derivatives contracts, super nerdy, technical, stared at. It wasn't even real sheets of paper. It was like electronic sheets of paper all day long. And there was something about going into the soup kitchen on Saturdays, having 200 pounds of ground beef, getting in there with my hands and actually creating something for me, which was super meaningful. And that's what kept me coming back week after week, month after month, year after year. At the time, I don't think I had the language to articulate what that meaning was. In hindsight, I know it was about being creative, about producing something physical and real in a world and a job that was otherwise very esoteric and conceptual. And I think that for me is what put me on the path of starting off as a server in the restaurant, then kind of graduating to a chef, and ultimately obviously became a donor as well. But I think that insight for me is one of the things that's super powerful about Golden and the work that we do today, because they have an appreciation for if you can get that right, if you can deliver something that is meaningful to people, that kind of scratches the itch that they can't scratch in their regular day jobs, I think that's going to be a really powerful kind of first step in nurturing the relationship. That all sounds great, right? Oh, sure, of course, we'd love to understand everything about everyone, but how do we do it, right? That's the big question. And so the next challenge that I'd suggest is you come up with mechanisms to capture that information at scale, right? And so when you give people the opportunity to engage in an open-ended fashion, to really share personal details or to talk about what's important to them, you're going to get much richer contextualization of who they are and what motivates them, much more so than a Google form with a bunch of drop-down boxes, right? And so there's obviously a tension that exists here, right? Because as I'm sure our friends at Virtuous and HubSpot and all the others say, no, we need structured data. We need the ability to make sure that everything fits in a checkbox or is compartmentalized conveniently. What I would suggest is that technology can actually help you do that at scale in a real way. And so I'll give you a couple examples. You're going to want to make it easy for people to both share information and also easy for you and your teams to digest that information and translate it into actionable things. For example, AI-enabled natural language chat interfaces are one way that you can help you as organizers can collect rich information about your volunteers. We have a mobile app that Golden uses that allows people anywhere in the country to download, look for service opportunities in their area. Next couple of weeks, we're launching this natural language chat interface that's going to start to prompt them about their intentions. What brings you here? What's meaningful to you? That sort of stuff. The second thing, and this is also kind of a recent product thing that we've been spending time on, is gamification around skills and abilities. And so what we do is you can start to ask questions or get badges on your profile of things like, oh, are you CPR certified? Or, oh, do you have legal training? Or, oh, and you get this really interesting picture of people who are proud of the things they've accomplished in their lives. And by the way, that also will be very useful both in the volunteering context, as you think about ways I can deploy people to find meaningful work in your organization, but also potentially in the fundraising context, because people now feel compelled to share parts of their identity or things that are meaningful to them in a way that it's just really hard to get through, as amazing as they are, Sal, just a donation form, right? And so, I think that for us is really exciting because in the volunteer context, we get this really rich picture of data and identity. And so again, just to summarize, while narratives are helpful, they must ultimately be stored in a structured way in order for their potential to be unlocked. And I think this is step one of collecting that information in a way that then, ultimately can be used. Okay, now how does it all start to come together in a meaningful way? Converting all that intention and that data we have into action. I said, donations, yeah, obviously they're all related. Number one, if you can capture this richly contextualized view of who your volunteers are, what motivates them, why they're interested in your org, the things that are meaningful to them in their personal lives outside of their interaction with you, you're just going to start to understand more about them and what motivates them. And then the question is, okay, so what do we do with that information? One of the things we're particularly proud of, by being a software that engages with volunteers throughout their volunteer journey and every single instance of volunteerism that they do, we have some really unique opportunities. So for example, we have a great integration with Fundraise Up right now, where at certain points in a volunteer journey, we can say when someone's reflecting on their experience of volunteerism, they're uploading photos, they're sharing stories of, oh, I had a great, a really meaningful time mentoring Timmy today. He'd done all his homework, whatever. And those moments where they share that information, we can then say, wow, we're so glad you had a 5-star experience today. Would you like to support, Timmy and the work we're doing by, donating $50 and, buying Timmy's books and pencils for the next semester, or whatever those things are. And so being able to find those moments of reflection and impact where people are the connection to your org is tightest is really powerful, because it's not just a drip campaign that, no offense to drip campaigns, but it's not a drip campaign that's going to show up days, weeks later. It's a person who in the moment is reflecting on an experience and using that specific time for a call to action to, for example, prompt them for a donation. Another thing that's interesting in the donation asks context is asking when an obligation is present. So someone was going to show up for a soup kitchen shift on Saturday. It's maybe Thursday. They go into the software, cancel their shift. They can't make it for whatever reason. Maybe their kids' t-ball schedule changed or whatever. We can take that opportunity to say, hey, we're really sorry you're not going to be able to make it this weekend. In lieu of your service, would you be willing to donate $25? So taking advantage of that moment in time where there's a little bit of, it is what it is, it's guilt. They signed up to do a shift and they're no longer to honor that commitment. To actually make a donation ask is a really interesting opportunity. Final thing is when there's external value for the volunteer, right? When you can do things like, hey, moment of celebration or elation, you've just done your 10th volunteer shift or your 100th volunteer shift, or maybe you've done your 100th hour. Let's take a moment to do things like create social media assets for them to celebrate that moment, where they can then share those things to start to celebrate their success and their commitment and their work with you. Obviously, that then can pay dividends in terms of their connection to your org. Maybe we couple that with the donation request, maybe not. The last thing I'll give you, and this is, I don't know has anyone ever read The Power of Moments? Okay. I know Jess mentioned moments at the beginning earlier today. If you haven't, I say optional side quest only because I'm not allowed to actually sign you homework, but everyone should read this book. Anyone who cares about donor insights or human instincts, go listen to The Power of Moments. The thing that's really, I think, special about the book, it's an easy read, it's an audiobook, just do it. They talk about, there are unique points in people's experiences that they constitute the capital M moments, and being able to be really intentional about the things that either you do when they experience those, or you can help craft for people. 4 at the bottom here are examples: moments of elevation, moments of insight, moments of pride, moments of connection. As much as you can help kind of both like manufacture those things and also help people appreciate them when they happen, is going to pay dividends for your organization. I know there was a conversation or a question after the last conversation with Riley about, how do we build community, all that sort of stuff. And like, this is like literally moments of connection is one of those things, right? And so it's a phenomenal read. It's an easy read. Do it. It can be a blueprint both for your professional work as well as, your life outside of your professional work as well. Okay, step 4. This is the sneaky one. This is, I think, one of the things that not everyone thinks about as kind of part of your natural engagement strategy, which is make sure you understand and acknowledge your advocates. I think when most people think about volunteers, and often donors, it's really easy to think about first order contributions. How many hours did this person sign up for? How many dollars did this person actually personally contribute? The thing that technology can help you do is understand who's actually driving engagement and participation with your org behind the scenes. It's that second order impact that we're focusing on here. So for example, it's not just who did the most volunteer hours, but who shared that volunteer opportunity with their friends, their coworkers, who's actually like stealthily behind the scenes recruiting for you, driving additional volunteers. Because those people in your organization are the real like multipliers of impact. Because everyone who becomes an advocate for your org, who is gonna take it upon themselves to go out and kind of evangelize on behalf of your organization, is going to give you and your organization leverage. Both from the standpoint of they're going to be talking to their warm connections, right? They're the people that they trust or the people that they work with, who it's going to be infinitely more successful than just another kind of cold outreach. Also, that scales so much more quickly than work that you can do, right? If every one person who you build is going to go out and talk to your org, or any relationship that you build is going to go out and talk to your org about 10 of their friends, that multiplier effect is going to be so powerful. And so this is, at Golden, we're proud of this. We have tools that the concept we use is called deep influence, which is it allows attribution for when you share a link to a volunteer opportunity. That link is unique to you and it's tracked back to you, and we can see how many people sign up from the link that they personally have generated and shared out. And so it really gives you insight into like who your super fans are, because then guess what? It's not just about congratulations on celebrating your 10th, volunteer or your 100th hour with us or whatever it is. It's, hey, thanks for helping us recruit 20 new volunteers to the org. Or hey, thanks for bringing these people in who may have become major gift donors or whatever it is. And I think when you can start to help people realize that their ability to be impactful goes just beyond their personal availability or their personal wallet, I think is going to really start to change the narrative around how you can, make people feel appreciated and continue that forward momentum and that kind of inertia that they're going to want to continue to be an advocate for your organization. And this last point's obvious: a well-utilized convener has the potential to be much more impactful to your organization than their direct service. And that's the point. So how does this all come together? At Golden, we feel very strongly that our vision for the future is one of a richer social fabric with more durable, lasting relationships between individuals and organizations. Part of how we do this is understanding kind of both sides of that ecosystem. Again, getting a richer appreciation for the people who come into your organizations, why they're volunteering, the skills and abilities they bring, what's going to be best, highest use of them for your organization, and also at the same time giving organizers the toolkits to be able to like sort through all that to figure out who are the people, why are they here, what are the ways I can best utilize them. And at the end of the day, we're firmly committed to an ecosystem where service is a central component, right? This service oughtn't be just a stopgap, right? It is something that can deliver meaning for people around the world, and we're committed to making service opportunities more accessible for everyone. And we're excited for all the work and the partners who help us along that journey. Okay, 30 seconds max about this. Golden, we are both a platform, so organizers use our tools to help keep track of the people in their ecosystem, to communicate with them, to understand things like, again, intentions, all that sort of stuff. We also remove a lot of the administrative burden associated with things like background checks and waivers and certificates of completion and hours recording and all that sort of stuff. We have lots of really accessible data-driven insights, super straightforward. We can talk about this at a later date. The thing that I think is also interesting is we also have an app. So we have a mobile app that anyone around the world can download, look for local service opportunities in their communities, which means not only are we a tool for organizers, we're actually a tool to connect organizers with prospective volunteers. And so people can download our app, look for stuff in their community, sign up in real time for service opportunities. We also are philosophically committed to having portable profiles for participants. It's a mouthful, but like what that means is if you sign up through our app and work with an org in our ecosystem as a volunteer, your service history doesn't live with that organization. Sure, they see it, but you actually have an org agnostic view of all of your service across different organizations, which means there's really interesting opportunities for us to do things with individuals in the ecosystem, like whether it's recognizing them for a Presidential Volunteer Service Award, whether it's other sorts of credentialization, National Honor Society printouts across all the service you've done. Like, we can do all that sort of stuff because we have what was a really innovative data model at the time in terms of really being participant-centric in the data model while providing excellent service and tools to our organizers. And that's it. If you're interested in learning more, you can scan this QR code, and I will open it for questions.
Okay, so you said 30 seconds about Golden. I'm going to make this one quick, but I have a follow-up question. Stay focused on Golden for just a moment, and I'm curious. You all see like a ton of volunteer data. You talk to people who are trying to make the most of volunteering within their organizations. What would you say is the biggest barrier to getting volunteers to become super fans, and how does Golden help overcome that barrier for nonprofits?
I think a lot of the stuff that we talked about here kind of broadly answers that question, but I think one of the biggest organizational limitations, generally speaking, is just a lack of connectivity internally, right? We see that, I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but folks just don't think of the potential that they see in volunteers to go beyond being really exceptional volunteers. And I think that's why we're so committed to like making this easier for people to see the potential in volunteers based on, whether it's their skills, abilities, whether it's their goals, right? Like, wouldn't it be great if you knew that someone who signed up for your soup kitchen shift on a Saturday actually was interested in board service, right? That would change the way you would interact with them. And we just, you need tools to help you do that, because it's impossible to do that at scale, but that's the sort of stuff that we think is really powerful to unlocking that.
So it sounds like basic visibility into the interest, the expanded interest of your volunteers, and Golden helps to unlock that visibility for the organization.
Yep.
Okay, cool. We'll open up to questions here in just a sec. One more question. So
Sure.
We partnered together on Surfrider Foundation, and you and I were chit-chatting about that yesterday. And we were talking about this idea of going from clipboard to, I can't remember, how did you finish that thought for me and explain what the heck I'm talking about? So
Surfrider's been mentioned a couple times this conference, but prior to using Golden, Surfrider has, I think now it's 86 chapters that are live in Golden. Surfrider's largely they do a lot more than this, but think of it like a beach cleanup organization, right? And so they had a bunch of surfer dudes and dudettes and dude persons or surfer persons, whatever, who were...
the word is surfers.
Surfers, a lot of surfers. Oh, look at that. I got my own way on this stuff. Okay, a bunch of surfers who, at each of these chapters that were all volunteers, right? They would go out and they'd be like, hey, I'm organizing a cleanup in San Diego or wherever it is around the country, and Surfrider Foundation would mail them a PDF or email them a PDF. They'd print it out, they'd put it on a clipboard, and people would sign in on that clipboard and sign, or maybe not, a waiver, and who knows whatever happened to that. But then, because I love surfers, but the surfers would leave the clipboard at the beach, and that data may or may not ever make its way back up to...
They would not leave it at the beach because they were there for beach cleanup.
Yeah. So in the trash, in the bag. Yeah.
Nothing here. No.
No.
They would take it home, but then recycle the paper is kind of the thought.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no. But the point is that data never made its way back to home base, right? To the national level. And so I think one of the things that was really exciting about our work with them is, we have a bunch of tools for all sorts of scales of organizations. We have, I should have mentioned at the beginning, we have free tools that are available. We have like basic entry level stuff, and we have tools that support complex, sprawling organizations like Surfrider. And so for us, it was really exciting to hear that because they were able to deploy our tools to all of their volunteer-led chapters at no cost to those chapters, all of a sudden, Surfrider, the foundation, the main one, and national level, was getting all of this data and tens of thousands of entries into their CRM that otherwise would have, died on a clipboard, not on the beach, but at a clipboard at their local affiliates. And so that's what gets us excited, because all of a sudden you'd have all of these volunteers who Surfrider now has insight into and understands and can do all sorts of different things with that they may never have had transparency into before.
Yeah, they had thousands and thousands of leads that were, engaged in the highest possible level. Someone gave their time and their energy and their passion, but they weren't added to a CRM, so there was no follow-up or engagement. So that's cool. All right, questions. What questions might you all have? How many people here have volunteers at their organization? Okay, we have a volunteer expert. Imagine, how many people here feel like they're absolutely capitalizing on volunteer opportunities? One. Okay, Abby. Way to go, Abby. You're not. Okay, that's like, she's leading our session on volunteer capitalism. Yes, we've got a question.
Yeah, it's hard, right, is the honest answer. And I don't think I have advice that's specific to your org, because you know your constituents better than I do. So I'd be remiss if I said, here's the answer. What I will say, and I think this is why in this presentation, if you go back to that premise slide about relationships, like that's the thing, right? Like if you can have a relationship of trust with your volunteers, that probably you'll have to build over time. Again, maybe they're referred by another person who they trust and will advocate for you, but like if someone just is coming to your org for the first time, my general advice would be to go slow, right? Like don't try to get it all up front, because as you acknowledged, right, being too aggressive with what you're trying to capture up front might have a little bit of a chilling effect for people, which might make them second guess your intentions. But I think what you said is absolutely right about trying to be transparent and like, here's why we're asking for this stuff. Here, we're going to use this for X, Y, and Z. We're not going to use this to just get a better wealth profile on you or whatever it is. But if we're actually, we need to understand your geographic limitations so we can route drivers at home. I think that's a very reasonable thing when contextualized with that information, right? And so, again, to the extent you have the luxury of having really good reasons for everything you're asking people, I would just err on the side of over-communication. The second thing I'll say, and we talked about this a little bit in the presentation, but like find ways where they want to proactively give it to you, right? Like, we talked about some of the gamification stuff. We talked about, other like badges or rewards or all that sort of stuff. Maybe you set up a recognition program. We're going to recognize one person every zip code. Guess what? We need to know what zip code you're in. Like, I don't know what those things are. I'm making it up. But I mean, if you find ways that people are going to want to give you that information because they feel like they can be of higher service to you, that might be another interesting way to kind of frame it to them.
Could I offer?
Please.
So I oftentimes talk about when at Team Rubicon, when I was talking about it earlier, now I'm like calm and I'm not coming out of meetings, so I know which organization I'm talking about. Sorry about that. We repurposed the skills of the military veterans to respond to natural disasters. And we gave an opportunity for military veterans to reclaim their sense of purpose and self-identity and community in returning back from their time serving the country in the military. And what was really interesting is technology played a huge role in our ability to scale from $250,000 to 51 million in 7 years. But what I haven't talked about a lot is we had an army of tens of thousands of highly qualified, skilled volunteers. And it was very interesting because over time, like at first it was a complete cluster. And it wasn't very organized, and it was like text messaging, we're going to Haiti, who can go now? And then over time, we had volunteer waivers, and we had safety protocols, and things became more complex, right? And then it reached a point where we actually realized that, oh, this is interesting, like we could train our volunteers to be a professional workforce. that we can actually take this disaster response mission that we have, and we need to instill some discipline and some way of working so that we're more credible with local government. And so we took on an ICS, incident command structure, which was our way of working alongside government agencies, and it gave us tremendous credibility. But what it also gave us was an opportunity to engage our volunteers in a really thoughtful way. So you might be signing up during a time when we're not actively responding to a hurricane. But before we did that, we didn't have a very good way of engaging those volunteers and getting them like excited about the mission and getting them excited to become what we call the gray shirt, our volunteers. So it was interesting because it was like we moved slow to move fast. Like we collected data quick, we collected leads, and then we nurtured those leads and we got them into our training pipeline, which got them ready to respond to a disaster. And it was this sort of feedback loop that happened over time, which was just really interesting because the iteration of a volunteer evolved as the organization matured. And I don't know, what you were sharing, I think about like, what's an example of taking that lead early and nurturing them, but then also identifying, oh, these are our super volunteers. These are the ones that are gonna like really come out time and time again. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think there's a couple things there, right? Like, to hit the last one first, right? Like, how do you think about and decide who are your super fans and for what reasons, right? Like, is it the ones that, again, personally come out? Is it the ones that end up being your advocates and go out on social media and talk about, you know, the work that you're doing in a recruiting context? Like, there's a bunch of stuff there. I think you're going back to the first part about that in terms of the recruitment process broadly, I think is a really interesting thing. And I think that's something that clearly, I think you did a really good job of capitalizing on kind of knowing the service members who were in your ecosystem or ones that you wanted to target, understanding intentions and the things that would be meaningful to them, you know, using that as kind of the hook to bring them in, and then to your point, nurturing them along the way and kind of amping up their engagement through time, I think is great, particularly doing it, you know, outside of a moment of crisis or an emergency, I think is also really smart. And I think, you know, the challenge for folks in this room is like, how do we figure out what those things are? Like, what's the hook? What's the, if you want to think of like, what's the trajectory of engagement that's appropriate given the kind of the compelling nature of the hook that you have? And I think trying to, you know, retrofit a version of that to whatever your use case or your organization or your value prop is for volunteers is a great kind of thought to leave everyone with. Yeah, so we've run a couple different experiments through time. Prior to the pandemic, we had a on-platform currency called carrots, and because we're golden, getting like carrots. Like anyway, the carrot system was one where you accrued basically on-platform currency is really what it was. You accrued carrots for service. And then we gave people an opportunity to redeem those carrots for entries into things like courtside seats for a Lakers game and all that sort of stuff. And so it was like a raffle mechanism effectively at the end of the day. That's one type of gamification. Another one is like literal like badges on profiles. I mentioned this credentialing that we're rolling out, right? That's another version of it where it's like, maybe it's not, you know, courtside seats to a Lakers game, but my profile looks prettier, fancier, more robust, whatever it is, and just trying to find those ways to take the data that we're collecting and make it meaningful and a little moment of recognition for someone, being like, oh, you've got your 5th badge. Like, how do you do that sort of stuff to create incentives for people? I think are kind of the two things that come to mind most acutely. If anyone else has any ideas of things that they've done in their orgs that they'd be willing to share, I'd obviously welcome any other input from folks in the room.
So I'm on the board for a nonprofit swim team, and we do an annual challenge to see how many yards each individual can swim in the month of February. And so it's a very time-bound challenge, and we use a merit badge system. So like, you know, you swam on Valentine's Day, but you also, you know, through the course of the month, you swam the length of the English Channel, broken up across all these different things. And folks really have enjoyed that. Our participation in the event just skyrocketed when we started introducing these like little just tiny graphic award things, but it was all very, very time-bound. So that might be an interesting way to test it out for your organization and see what the appetite is.
There's the official last slide. Thank you.
Oh yeah, this is how you can get a hold. And go to golden.com.